Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here with us. We've got a really great program today. My name is Addie. I'm the leadership coordinator, for the Bend Young Professionals program. And this is actually a Bend Young Professionals expert webinar today. And we're so glad that we've invited other community members to join us. So if you're here and you're not a young professional, don't worry, this is also for you. This has been put on by the Bend Young Professionals, the City of Bend, as well as the Bend Chamber of Commerce. So thank you so much for being here with us. And I just have a couple chamber updates for you before we get into today's program. We have some great programs coming up with Mo Carrick on wellness and self-care on the 16th and 17th of this month. So that's a great one for we have two different tracks for leaders in companies and employees. So you can go to bendchamber.org and check those out and get signed up. Those are going to be really great. And then also, I want to make sure for any YPs out there that you are signed up for our newsletter, and you can do that at bendyp.org. So we are always sending out, updates on all of our events that are happening. And our next Dev Lab is with Stephen Koski. It's going to be called Conversational Vulnerability, Building Trust to Have Difficult Conversations. So we feel it's going to be a really important one. That's on March 11th. So make sure to sign up for our newsletter so you get updates on that. So today, I'm so glad to introduce Eric King, our city manager. He's going to be presenting today. Hello, Eric.
Hello, so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And we also are joined by two of our new council members. We're so happy to have Rita Schenkelberg with us, Councilor Schenkelberg, and we also have Councilor Melanie Kebler. So thank you so much for joining us today. Eric, I will pass it to you.
Great, thank you. Really, our attempt here is to describe a little bit of both the how the city works and the what we're focused on, what we have been focused on, and where we're going with our council goals. So, the whole idea of creating partnerships to make Bend a great place means we have to understand the systems that we operate under, how we can change those systems if they're not working for us, and making sure that we're in alignment and when possible. And I see these as opportunities to, again, just sort of share that information. My hope is that it's really interactive. We've got some questions for you to participate in through Menti poll. So let's go ahead and get started. So Michaela, if you could warm us. Well, we have a warm up here to city government. That's what we've titled it, to kind of just whet your palate with the services that the city provides and how that interacts with the community. This graph tries to do that in sort of one page in a visual form, using Mount Bachelor as the backdrop that kind of underlines our city core services that we provide. So starting with our kind of basic infrastructure, we of course provide not only our transportation system, but there's pipes underneath the ground, our water utilities. So sewer, water, and then storm water, public safety, police and fire as first responders. When we talk about governance layered on top of that, that really is the city council, city manager's office, all of our what we call kind of central services to working together to deliver those services in an efficient way. Layered on top of that, the fancy word of land entitlement, what that really means is let's make sure that we've got enough land for Bend to grow, not just out, but also up as well. And I love the fact that, Bend Rising is a theme for the Young Professional Network, because we're going to need help as we look towards Bend becoming a more urban city, and it's going to look different than it does now. But that's a city service, that planning work that we do, that has everything to do with not only just land, but the built environment as well. So the buildings as they get built, let's make sure that they're energy efficient, that they comply with our safety codes, et cetera. And then once it's built, making sure it's clean and safe. We have a municipal code that we ensure through code enforcement, et cetera. Then layered on top of that is, we say economic development. We think really broadly about economic development at the City of Bend. It's not just about attracting companies or jobs. It's making sure that we have a landscape that supports all folks that want to call Bend home. And so that includes some functions like our affordable housing program is nested under our economic development department, along with some other functions. So that gives you a sense of what the city does through its core services. I'll talk a little bit about what we don't do in a minute, but let me focus on those clouds in this backdrop. They really represent, I would say, kind of core community values. This is not an all-inclusive list. It's just those values that I think we as folks that live in Bend, you know, it's a special place. I call it an intentional community where people don't just end up here by accident. They really want to be here, and they bring a set of values with them. And we want to do our best at the city to make sure that those core services I just outlined are tethered to those community values. So those values include environmental justice, making sure that as Bend grows, that we don't lose sight of the natural environment that brought us here, and we protect that natural environment. And so that's done through good planning, protecting those natural resources like water and trees and air. Social justice, making sure all voices are heard in how the city does its business. Everything from our long range planning to how we, to make sure that we equitably deliver our services for operations and maintenance, to how we engage the community and making sure that we are leading with that equity lens. Housing and homeless services, this is a strong value right now as Bend is experiencing just that continued growth and upward pressure on housing prices. So what can we do from a policy perspective to create more housing opportunities for Bend? So looking at our codes and our funding streams and how we can leverage infrastructure to be able to address that value. So business, how do we have a sustainable economic landscape that we don't become overly dependent on one industry, that as we grow, that it's that sort of what we call kind of economic gardening concept where we're planting seeds and growing our small businesses in particular. We are really well known for our kind of entrepreneurial spirit. Let's make sure that that continues to be a strength for Bend. And then this concept of heritage, you know, as Bend is growing, we get a lot of reaction from our community members saying they're anxious about what that might mean in terms of losing what's special about Bend. So that could be historic landmarks. It could be that special kind of neighborhood place that you have, or that park, or whatever, you know, and it's different for everybody. But let's make sure that as we grow, we don't sacrifice what's special about Bend, and keeping all these things in balance. And we typically do that. Those clouds are sort of the touch point is our boards and committees. So we have a Bend Economic Development Advisory Board. We've just recently created an Environment and Climate Committee. I just got done speaking with them to help us implement our climate action plan. We have a newly established Human Rights and Equity Commission that's going to help us improve on sort of that social justice front. We have a Neighborhood Leadership Alliance to help us look at to preserve our heritage. So, and many more, but this just kind of gives you that sort of governance structure in one page of connecting those community values to our core services. Next slide. Oh, yeah, this is just what we don't do. So it's a little bit uncommon to have parks and libraries. Sometimes those are city services. So just to be clear, if you're new to Bend, those are separate taxing districts with separate boards and staff. And same thing with our 911. It's assessed county-wide, but it's a separate board, separate tax rate, along with our jail, and of course the other services that are provided by Deschutes County, mainly public health services. Schools are a separate taxing district, and our garbage service is done through what are called franchise agreements. We've got 2 service providers. Those are private companies that provide that service. You might see a lot of cities on the East Coast. If you're from the East Coast, you have cities that have more of a centralized authority where they're making decisions around schools. So for example, Chicago right now, there's been all this news around getting kids back in schools, and that's the mayor of Chicago is making that decision. That's a different structure than we have here in Bend, and really kind of in general in the West and in southern parts of the country. It's more of that decentralized form of local government. All right, so now is the time for a little interaction here. So if you could get out your phones and go to menti.com. The code is 6888397. And the first question, let's see who gets it right. When was Bend founded? Meaning, when was it incorporated as a city? Give it a minute or two, or a little less than that. All right, and the answer is 1905. So yes, it looks like a majority of you got that right. 1905. We celebrated our centennial birthday in 2005. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Schenkelberg to talk about City Council and kind of how City Council's role fits within that sort of ecosystem of delivering local government sort of public services.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. My name is Rita Schenkelberg. I am a new city councilor. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I'm really excited to be here and excited to have this conversation with you all. So there are 7 people sitting on that dais and in the background, and dais is like the place that we sit. I think that's a really important thing to bring up. A lot of city government and any government has a lot of jargon, and so I think it's really important. And one of the goals of our city council is to kind of break down a lot of those terms. And so floating in the background behind is kind of our mission statement or preamble that this council has been kind of working on and talking about environmental justice, talking about serving the entire community, and really talking about how we can kind of support not only the humans that have lived in Bend for maybe a really long time, but also the humans that are coming here, and how to make Bend an inclusive and a safer place for all individuals. And so we have 7 city councilors. So we went through our last election where Councilor Kebler, Councilor Perkins, and Councilor Broadman were all elected. So it's 4 electeds on the presidential election year, and then on the alternating year, two years later is during the governor's election. We all serve a 4-year term, so that means that we'll go through 2 different goal-setting experiences, and so we all just kind of got elected and then are going through this really intense experience of how to provide feedback and really set the vision for the next 2 years and looking at budget. Our first elected mayor was elected in 2018, our current sitting mayor, Mayor Russell. And then, so our mayor pro tem, or our assistant mayor per se, is appointed by all of the city councilors. So when we were all sworn in on January 6th, we all also voted, or took a vote to appoint Councilor Campbell, Goodman Campbell, as our mayor pro tem. We're all paid a monthly stipend to just kind of support a lot of the constituent correspondence that we work on and sitting on committees and all of the major many roles that city councilors hold. And these positions are at large. It's not by district. So like some of the elections that are coming up in May are by district. So school board members are like kind of spread throughout the city. For city councilors, we're just, if you live within the city of Bend, you can run. And yep, I think that's it. So next slide, Michaela. That's all of us on swearing in day on January 6th. It was really exciting to kind of see everyone and celebrate. It'd been one of the major celebrations that we were all kind of even in the virtual space together. So our city council meetings are the first and third Wednesday. We start about 5 o'clock. And then we have our work session where it's more of a conversation and educational piece for counselors. There's more of a presentation and more organic conversation. And then our official meeting starts at 7 and it starts with public comment and then our agenda and all these pieces. You can always go to the city's website to kind of look at the agenda beforehand. So we have our first elected mayor there. We have the majority of women on city council, which is brand new for this year. And I am the first person of color and openly queer person to be sitting on council. And so really working on bringing that diversity and equity and inclusion into city government, and also bringing different perspectives, having renters and people who have experience as like attorneys, but also experiences in the nonprofit sector, and having kind of different lived experiences brought to local government. Yep, next slide. Thanks, Michaela. And then we have another mentee. And so who was Ben's first mayor? Those are your 4 options. I always find the mentees super cool because you can see each person kind of voting, and then the humans that kind of wait a little bit in the wings to try and figure out who the majority is. Give it one more moment. All right, and then Michaela, perfect. So it was Arthur L. Goodwillie was our first mayor. So a little bit, oh, go ahead, Eric, take it away on the goal setting process.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rita. So I want to talk a little bit about how we integrate those community values into those core services. We do that through good council goal setting. And there's a lot of input that goes into that process. So I want to talk a little bit about it. This photo right here is, we did also a virtual goal setting process, which is new for us this year. It was a 2-day retreat in January that took inputs, if you go to the next slide, Michaela, from a variety of sources. So we pride ourselves in being very accessible and open to community feedback. So there's all sorts of ways to interact and help shape the priorities for council that include just the run-of-the-mill, the emails that we get a lot that come to council. We had a listening session focused on council goals that took place on January 11th. We had over 200 ideas presented by upwards of 50 organizations, including the Ben Chamber, neighborhood associations, many nonprofits, and again, representing all those sort of values that I talked about earlier. We had a very specific community engagement effort this last fall around policing. We did also some listening sessions and some online engagement efforts. So that information was a report was put together and shared with council last fall and was a key input to council goal setting. And then every 2 years, we do a statistically valid survey that really looks at our performance as a city and see how the community is rating us, as well as prioritization of what really matters. And that changes over time. This year, transportation and affordable housing have been kind of the top areas. Maybe 2 years ago, it was transportation, then affordable housing. It's been the reverse this year. And of course, again, those public comments that always kind of come in. And then we have an ecosystem of boards and committees that really help guide the city council. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment, but that those boards and committees are involved in those listening sessions. And then not only in helping to shape council goals, but then once we develop a work plan and a budget to go along with that, we then monitor progress every quarter and invite our boards and committees to make sure that we're staying on track. We go to the next slide. So this just kind of gives you a sense of where we are in the process. It is, kind of we're midway through where we've got a framework, and we have a couple of accounts that both Melanie and Rita will talk about how that's shaping up and a little bit of the what. So that framework is being worked on right now. We've got a small group of counselors that are meeting to help us refine it. We'll have a checkpoint with council next week in a work session to see if we've got it right, to take these broad areas that they talked about in their retreat, put strategies and actions attached to that. We'll ask for a vote and say in a formal vote on this at the second meeting in March. And that's that framework that we then use to then build a budget. Our budget cycle is a 2-year cycle, and that it runs on our fiscal year, which starts July 1st. So that's where we are right now. We're doing this intensive kind of planning effort, making sure we're integrating community feedback in developing this work plan, all culminating with an approved budget in June, and then start the year July 1 with the new fiscal year. And then, as I mentioned, those quarterly meetings to make sure that we're on track. And all that is also in the public realm too. We have dashboards and other metrics that we're tracking within each of our council goal areas. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rita to talk about some of the work that council did in putting together their framework.
Yeah, so we went through a city council retreat is what they call it, but really it was us just working for many, many hours. Initially just kind of trying to figure out like where we were at and kind of the goals that we had and how we could support the constituents in moving Bend forward. And so this image right here is during our city council goal setting, we had this amazing illustrator who would take notes and kind of formulate our ideas in all of these bullet points. So this was one of our first activities of the goal retreat. And it was what was true today that we thought was really important and captured kind of our experience in Bend right now. And then what we would like to be true in 10 years. So what a lot of us know is that city government is a long-term plan. We're planning things for 2 years, 4 years, 10 years in advance. And so really incorporating all of these beautiful true in 10 years ideas. And some of these, as I'm reading them, are like something that Councilor Kebler said or something that I said that we thought was really important and information that the constituents had shared with us. And really looking at how to meet the needs of this growing community and also making Bend a safer place to live. It also, I thought, was really poignant in showing how we want to bring a lot of what we're experiencing now forward. So it's not this idea that Bend is going to suddenly become a brand new place. It's like we have a lot of foundation here that we want to continue to cultivate and grow upon. And so using that and then growing and then like spreading our branches and leaves into the sky and reaching and continuing to reach. And I think that's all. Next slide. And so I saw a question in the chat about kind of the actual goals, and we're still working on those. But what we're looking at right here is just kind of how we're breaking down council goals. So each of those kind of bigger texts are kind of those goal buckets that we're currently working on. So that preamble that you saw in the background when you had the figures with the dais is that first part, and then kind of these buckets of goals. The Environment and Climate Action Committee is part of the Environment and Climate kind of goal bucket, and then safety, health, accountability, and justice, and kind of breaking down all of these different categories and kind of what we would like to fall underneath those categories, the values that build those categories, and then also city staff creating many, many, many action items underneath all of those goal categories. And so how this is going to kind of play out, goal setting is a decently long process. It's been in the works and it will be in the works until about March-ish. I think Eric can always correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct. Yeah, and maybe just to add also to what Rita was saying, there's a lot of detail that's being worked on. Melanie and Councilor Campbell and Councilor Goodman Campbell are part of a subgroup. The council will see this draft next week. It includes those 6 areas that Rita just talked about. Each of those have strategies. There's 6 areas, 20 strategies, so like 3 to 5 strategies under each area, and then a total right now of like 79 action items. So you'll start to see a lot of detail beginning next week as we're putting the final touches on it.
And it would be, so we're going over it in the work session that I spoke about earlier. So then you can always peek in during those work sessions to kind of see, it's like, oh, how are the counselors kind of talking about this? Oh, wow, that's a piece that I might want to call in or email someone because I wonder if that this kind of got lost. And I think that it's a really cool process to be able to watch from beginning to end, and hopeful that if we missed anything, you all will kind of let us know. And I'll turn it over to Councilor Kebler.
Thanks, Rita. And I'll just say, as a person who is a real visual learner, having that kind of illustrated visual piece of our goals was so awesome. And I'm excited for next week to have the plan come out into our meeting and the public can look at it. And that segues into our next section, which is opportunities for engagement. So I think you'll see in our goals that we want to continue to have strong community engagement with the local government. And I'm just going to go through a few of the ways that we've already got some systems in place for that. One of them is our neighborhood associations. So these are actually written into our code and are playing a big role in our land use process in Bend because they get informed about developments that are happening within the neighborhoods, and then they can share information out to people in the neighborhoods about what's going on and how they can participate in the land use process. I know that the NAs do a lot more than that too. They have regular meetings. They're sort of a clearinghouse or a sounding board for problems that are going on in the neighborhoods, speeding and traffic safety, other issues that folks are seeing in their neighborhood and might want to push up to a committee or to city council to talk about that. So this is a really good way to get involved on a kind of sub level in your neighborhood and just connect with your neighbors too and find out more about what's going on around your neighborhood. The other things, I'll touch on that neighborhood associations have been involved in and continue to be involved in our wildfire prevention efforts, litter cleanup, the neighborhood street safety program to try to identify small safety projects that can be brought to residential streets in our town, Good Samaritan programs and all of that. I will say for you YPs, we would really love to see more younger people involved in the boards of the NAs and participating and having your voice heard on these boards. And you just, you have different perspectives and skills from some of the people that regularly sit on these boards who also are doing great work. So, like assisting the NAs moving to virtual and doing all their work on Zoom for the past year. The boards that had a few younger members maybe did that transition a little easier. So there's a lot of things we think that particular demographic in Bend can offer. So please do check out your NAs if you haven't already before. Okay, so another great way that we get input from our residents is through our committee system. And we have this, you can see this full circle of different types of committees. Some of them are just standing committees. Some of them come up for certain periods of time, like a budget committee comes up for when we're doing our budget, versus the environment and climate committee is going to be, a committee that's always around and helping us with those issues. The affordable housing committee works, on approving and moving forward the funding that we have available for those projects. So there's all sorts of committees that you can get involved in. Our two newest ones are going to be the Transportation Bond Oversight Committee and the Human Rights and Equity Commission, which both Rita and I are working on helping figure out who's going to be appointed to those committees and commissions, which is really cool. And all those committees and commissions will always work with staff and then advise council and bring issues up to council that council then makes final decisions about. These are appointed people that are volunteers, but you are considered a public official as part of these committees, and you're subject to, the meetings are subject to public meetings laws and public records laws. Most of them meet around monthly, and the work that they do is falls under our council goals. So whatever we end up with our work plan is going to involve how does that apply to committees and what they're doing over the next 2 years on their own agendas too. And I'll just mention really quick, Michaela, before you switch, we just also, I think, made it quite a bit easier to apply to committees through our website interface, which is great. So it's a very pretty simple form. Before you had to sign up and make an account, which I hate that when websites make me do that. So I'm glad that we switched it up and made it a little more accessible. And I think this council is going to look at how can we make this even more accessible to people that, work a 9-to-5 job or have young kids, how do we make sure, or, don't have access to internet maybe as reliable or don't have access to technology. How do we make sure those people can still participate in and apply for and do work on committees if they want to? Okay, thanks, Michaela. Okay, so then there's other opportunities to give input. Some of what Eric mentioned earlier about like special listening sessions, the listening session we had particularly for our goals. You'll see some of these kind of like pop-up things that happen in neighborhoods. I know I went to one about the Murphy Road project and the roundabout that just got built next to my neighborhood, where you could actually just look at maps and talk to staff and, you know, talk about the project and your input on it. There's also public meetings of the committees. The council meeting obviously is a public meeting. Our planning commission is a big one where a lot of changes in our code and our land use comes up, and those are always public and open as well. And then we also do run surveys. We just did one at the end of last year, and from time to time you'll see other ones like a survey on policing and other things like that that we use to get that public input back to us. So there are opportunities that pop up. And again, you know, I will say that we're going to continue to look at how to increase and expand this so that more people feel like they have access to their government and can kind of participate or give their input, and they don't feel like, you know, the meetings are only during the daytime when they can't come, or if there's a language barrier, we want to reduce those as well. So we're just hearing from more people around the city about how they feel about what's going on in their town. So these are things to look out for as well. And then I think Rita mentioned, but you can always just email the council. We see them, they go to all of us, we read them. And then there are, you know, opportunities at our regular council meetings to call in. It's actually pretty easy now with Zoom to access those and to give a 2-minute comment on a subject you think is important for us to hear from you about. Okay, I think that was it for the subject, or sort of the substantive stuff. So I think we're going to use
we want to use Menti for questions, but I know some folks have also submitted questions just via Zoom. So we'll do our best to capture everything. And I might start with the first one, which is that I see in the chat, which is how does the status of the 2019, 2021 and earlier plans play into current focuses? So that is very much a part of one of the key inputs in establishing goals is what we're already doing, because a lot of those projects don't necessarily just stop at the end of a fiscal year. They might transcend. So that does get incorporated. And some of those focus areas that Rita talked about are somewhat similar. They've been adjusted to kind of fit with the value set of this council. But I would say that the previous goal that was economic vitality, that had kind of environment, the housing issues, and just sort of growth issues all in one. One of the big differences with this kind of council goal framework that's in development right now is really splitting that out. So there's going to be a specific goal around housing, environment and climate, and then instead of economic vitality, it's what's called shared prosperity. Really making sure that we're, especially as we've just experienced the pandemic and the economic devastation, that we focus on those that are most vulnerable. We know our economic situation has affected our service sector, and we need to pay special attention to that and our policies and programs, et cetera. And so that kind of shared prosperity kind of focus area captures it. All right, so I'm going to go and see what questions now are on Menti. Okay, so the first one here, what is a good email address for concerns that we may find? I can say real quickly that one, so it's councilall@bendoregon.gov is the most efficient way to address council, and there's some staff also that receive that email, and we can help get you directed in the right place. All right, the next one, I'm going to ask if one of the counselors would be willing to take this on. It's what goals are you most excited about as new counselors?
Oh man, there's so much. I mean, the slide that showed the true now and true in 10 years, that was a really neat exercise, because I think as we went through it, the group of us were realizing how many values we share and how much we're aligned on the things we want to get done during our terms and during the next 2 years. So there's a lot I'm excited about as far as pushing forward on developing our transportation system and implementing the GO bond and the projects there. Looking at our community engagement, I'm really excited about that as well. And I think housing, I think we're going to be setting some really strong goals around housing, because we know that's a top issue for the community right now. And then having that shared prosperity lens as we're coming out of the pandemic and the crisis that's happened, and helping make sure that we're lifting everyone in the community up. Having those overlaid on I'm just really excited about the focus that we've taken and the sort of the vision we have. And we haven't finalized all of our actions. There's a few I'm super excited about, but I'll just say that I think the way that we've aligned and kind of looked forward is really exciting to me.
Great. Rita, anything to add?
I would say that Melanie basically covered all of the buckets in her description. But just, yes, I agree with everything that Melanie said. And it's been an amazing experience to kind of dream and vision how we see Bend and how we can support Bend in this goal setting.
Great. Next question is also for council. It reads, this council seems to have especially strong interest in climate action. What specific measures and investments do you anticipate in the next several years to realize your goals?
Something I'm really excited about is hearing the recommendations from the Environment and Climate Committee. There's some amazing environmental leaders on that committee and have so much more knowledge than I do about environmental justice, and really hearing kind of how they experience Bend and how we can incorporate that within goal setting.
Yeah, I agree. I think our newly formed and that just started meeting last November, I think our Environment Committee is going to be helping us look to our climate action plan, which was put in place before we were elected, and to tell us the ways that we're going to start implementing that, looking at how we can look to the way that we build and what's going on with our transportation system, as far as reducing things like vehicle miles traveled, carbon emissions, and also looking at where we're getting our energy and how to transition towards more renewable energy. I think that's going to be a big metric for us to look at as well going forward. So I think implementing a lot of what's already been in place in the Community Climate Action Plan is going to be key, and the Environment Committee is going to help us to do that.
Okay, and I'm just realizing as I approve questions, they're not showing up on slides, so I apologize. Next one is, how has COVID changed the planning process? I might tackle that one. So from a technical perspective, so Oregon has a unique land use system that the first goal of it is community participation. So we have very specific requirements on especially those kind of larger developments, so subdivisions, what we call master plans. We have moved to a virtual environment, so that's changed. The Neighborhood Leadership Alliance, one of those kind of core committees, has really dove into improvements, or looking at making improvements, and those actually have just recently been approved unanimously by council. This new council, one of the first things on their agenda to make it more accessible, improving signage, improving the amount of folks that receive notices on those developments. So that is changing. And then of course, I think we're seeing in some ways more participation in this virtual environment. And so some of those things are going to hopefully continue post-pandemic. All right, let's go to this next question. In what ways is council helping to support great density and overcoming the NIMBY problem?
I'll tackle that first. Just for anyone that doesn't know, NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard, and sort of this concept of people that I think the trope of it is that someone that just doesn't want anything to change in their neighborhood and opposes new things. And I think there is obviously going to be people in town, frankly everyone in the city, that's going to see that the city is changing, and change can be hard, especially if you've been here for a while or you've seen the city when it was much different, as I did growing up here. I remember there wasn't a parkway until the end of my time in high school. Things change, and it can be difficult, absolutely, to look at to experience that in your neighborhood. So I think the way that we approach that is just having great communication and opportunities for engagement, and looking at really smart policies that are going to bring the greatest good to the most people in the city. And I am a proponent of looking at how we can do infill and density. And I think one way to think about it is if we allow a sort of sprinkling or a development of density and infill throughout the city, in more places of the city, then we're having sort of more gradual changes in folks' neighborhoods instead of, you know, putting all the density infill in just in one neighborhood and creating a huge change for that neighborhood. You know, I think that that idea of gradual change moving forward, it's inevitable. So let's try to do it in a smart way, in a sustainable way, and keep people engaged in understanding the process.
And then kind of a related question, and maybe Rita, if you want to talk about this, is this came through Zoom. It seems like Bend is committed to major infill and housing, including quadplexes and triplexes, and doing radical things like no parking and development. Yet I don't hear as much about putting a lot of effort towards improving bus systems, sidewalks, and bike paths, which will lead to more cars on the road. Also, do the councilors include animals such as our local deer population in the concept of livability, or are we going to become Portland East?
Sorry about that. Some technical issues happening on my screen. A little bit on what Melanie was kind of talking about. I think a huge conversation around density and like the NIMBYism is, it's really important that we talk about changing the culture around like our houseless neighbors and around humans who don't have anywhere to live. I also sit on the Affordable Housing Action Committee, and we don't have housing for people who already live here. And so that piece I think is a really important part to stress, is that we don't have enough. And so creating all of these variety of housing units means that humans who already live here will have somewhere to live. And so I think that was a really important part. And then I know a little bit about what the question that Eric asked is, I think it is a concern on how we can kind of protect our current natural environment as we increase density. And I think that Bend and the Environment and Climate Committee, as I continue to kind of put their name out there, are going to help and support us. And I think that it's really important as we continue to have conversations about development code. We have many constituents often talking to us about tree code and ways that we can support the natural environment. And so continue to give us that feedback, and we will continue to take it and work with developers and working with increasing that density moving forward. Did I answer that question completely, Eric? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's and Melanie, if you want to add to it too, I think when we talk about issues of parking, transportation, affordable housing, and creating kind of equitable opportunities for everybody, it's all integrated. So even that earlier visual with the council goals, it's not linear where it's just in these discrete, buckets, but there's a lot of overlap, and they all kind of work together as a system. So as we grow as a community, I think it's important that we look at not just one piece of it, but look at the many pieces that help us create the kind of community that we want to see here in Bend. And in some ways they're at odds, and that there's a natural tension there. And the boards and committees that kind of that visual that has Neighborhood Leadership Alliance and affordable housing and economic development, they are going to be different positions, and our intent is to try to blend that together. And that's part of why we do these quarterly updates. We're still evolving and improving this process, but to make sure all those pushes and pulls are factored in and helping us make good decisions that balance those objectives. Anything else that you would add, Melanie?
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to a little bit of the question about the transportation improvements, I think, again, and I don't know if we can make that visual available of our sort of what we want to be true in 10 years, what we're creating is that integrated vision of not just we're going to have more housing, but we're going to have a sustainable community. People are going to feel safe, and people are going to be able to get around in a lot of different ways, because as Eric says, these are absolutely related. Transportation and housing and climate and environment are absolutely very related. So we can't do things in a vacuum. And I don't think that's what this council wants to do. And I think we do recognize that we can't just make one policy change and say, that's it. We need all the tools, and we need to support one policy change over here with another idea or project or, achievement and activity over here. And so I'm really excited about the Transportation Bond Oversight Committee that's going to help us get going on some of these transportation projects that the voters just said yes to. And we're interviewing a lot of great people that have a real good understanding of our system and the inequities that are in it. and how to start getting people, meaningful choices of how they get around town, which is very connected to our development and housing and how we're going to be sustainable and continue to protect our environment while we grow. So yeah, it's all linked together. And just because we're talking about one thing one day doesn't mean we're not thinking about how that implicates the other side of the equation.
All right, this next question is, I think, really relevant for the Young Professional Network, which is what kinds of skills or experiences best set you up for success as a counselor? What would you suggest a younger person do to prepare to run for office?
Do it. Do it. I think that it's a very specific human that wants to be kind of in the public eye and wants to go through the work of running a campaign. And if you don't have a whole lot of experience with legal terms, learn a lot in a really short amount of time. So if you're feeling that fire inside of your belly, yes, do it. Some of the skills and experiences that were helpful for me is being really clear on kind of what my truths were and what I saw for myself as a city councilor, and what were the things that brought me into wanting to run. Being really confident in kind of your voice and kind of how you show up in places, and really knowing like kind of what role you want to play within like local government. So when we look at like governance as a whole, like, are you kind of the truth teller? Are you the public representative? Are you the person who really likes to get into the nitty gritty and really understand like all of the policy ideas and go through like each resolution and each action item, really figure out kind of what lights your fire about local governance, and then get really interested and excited and maybe do trainings around that.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, if you're thinking about running for office and you have a real desire to be a leader in the community in that role, go for it. You don't have to know everything about everything the city does. That's why Eric's here. That's why we have a great staff running the city that can always answer questions and get you up to speed, as we were brought up to speed after we were elected, in a really great and informational manner. As far as just like kind of skills to develop or think about, and something that helped me. So I'm an attorney, and I spent my early career, 10 years appearing in court and sort of doing some public speaking in that way. And it's a little bit of arguing too. That's not necessary, but the idea of public speaking, if you don't feel comfortable with that, or you think you want to practice that, that's a great skill to develop, because if you run a campaign, you're going to be talking to people in public. And then as a counselor, of course, just like this, you're going to be talking to groups. And then I think, getting yourself involved in a board of a nonprofit, or a city committee, or a county committee, or somewhere where you're working collaboratively with a group would be a great experience to have before you run for something like a city council. So you can talk about how you work in a group, and you can kind of understand your own dynamic when you're forced to look at data, make decisions, and things like that. I think those are a couple things that it's great for anyone who wants to run for office to look into if you want to develop some additional skills.
Great. Kind of along those lines, the next question, what does it look like to serve on a neighborhood association board, time commitment, et cetera? And Michaela, I might kind of call on you. So Michaela works for the City of Bend in our communications department and is a liaison to our neighborhood system, among other duties. So Michaela, would you maybe paint that picture of what that looks like if folks are interested in being part of our neighborhood system?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So we have 13 great neighborhood associations that are all working on some of these very questions that you're asking. For the neighborhoods, they typically meet once a month as a neighborhood association board. And then they usually have 1 to 2 general meetings each year. So as a board member, the opportunities are kind of endless. You're really running a little independent organization. You're talking about, a lot of the neighborhood associations that I've been working with are needing people with technology skills so that you can keep their websites updated and they can keep important information available to the community. There are other positions where you can run a litter cleanup team or work on some of those more community building type efforts that neighborhoods have. I know one of our neighborhood associations here, Larkspur, has a Good Samaritan program where during times like this, when there's loads of snow dumping down, they're matching volunteers to help blow snow with some of their lesser abled community members who can't maybe shovel that snow on their own. And so there's lots of different elements to these neighborhood associations. I think what I would say is if you have specific questions, you can go to our website. It's bendoregon.gov/neighborhood associations. And there you can find what neighborhood association you're a part of. My email and contact information is there. So you have more in-depth conversations or want a connection to one of the neighborhood boards, I'm happy to do that. And they can tell you how they run their board, because they're all a little bit different and have their own personalities too. So thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks, Michaela. I'm going to take a question in the chat, which is in the southeast part of Bend, with the new high school and several hundred acres recently brought into the urban growth boundary, will there be a substantial commercial area in order to limit the traffic coming into the core, such as a grocery store, gas station, daily services? The short answer is yes. There is land that is zoned. It's really at the corner of Knott and 15th. I guess that would be the northeast corner of that intersection, that is for commercial. And so that's what the city does. The city makes sure that there's sufficient land for jobs and housing and amenities and neighborhoods, et cetera. And the market then builds and responds to that. So, as that high school is being built and comes online next fall, there's some new residential development that's happening along 15th and other areas in that general vicinity. And of course, as mentioned in the chat, the urban growth boundary, there's some land that's being planned for right now, the infrastructure needed to support additional development. Sometimes it takes the rooftops or the housing units, apartments, single family homes, et cetera, to come into play first, to then create that critical mass, to then build some of those commercial areas like grocery stores and restaurants and things. So, but we have reserved land for that for sure. So hopefully it'll come soon. I think especially with the high school kind of coming online next fall.
Can I speak to that a little bit, Eric? Since
Yeah.
This is the corner of town that I live in, and we absolutely need to have another grocery store and some more commercial and employment stuff going in. And I will say, if people look up the Southeast Area Plan on the city's website, you'll see kind of, I think that's coming to us pretty soon, right, Eric?
In April.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to be finalizing and looking at that. And that's where we designate with zoning and other things, what we think is going to happen in that corner and how it's going to build out. And yeah, I was really excited to see a pretty big commercial, because I think that will serve this area and also the area to the south of us. And I'm a real big proponent of having complete neighborhoods where your basic needs and necessities are all really close to you. So that can reduce, how much people have to drive, and it also just makes for great places, little communities to live in Bend. As a kid, I always walked up to the Expressway, which is sort of the corner store for this side of town. And we don't really have another one yet. So I'd love to see more of that kind of stuff coming in as we develop new neighborhoods in Bend.
All right, I'm going to take another question from Menti, which is, how involved are members within the health industry, specifically focused on social determinants, engaged? So I can maybe start with this, and then if Rita or Melanie, you want to chime in. The county government typically is so they're agents of the state, and so a lot of the behavioral mental health services are provided through the county and then through a system of nonprofit organizations that might help hold contracts with the county. I'll just give you the COVID, for example. We work closely with our public health department and make sure that their voice is sort of centered in the discussions around what's safe here in Bend, so that we're relying on experts. Given that that's not a city core service, there is integration through, we have an emergency operations center in response to COVID that does, again, put public health in the center of that. I think there's a lot more work that is intersecting land use planning around public health. So we talk about this concept, kind of feeding off the last question, of complete communities. So just that concept of having a grocery store or restaurant where you can walk to or bike to in your neighborhood improves the overall health of our community, because it's giving people choices and options to move around, healthy choices and options to do that. And it's just providing less stress on our infrastructure. So it's a good from an economic perspective, because when jobs are in one place and your housing is another, that's a lot of wear and tear on that infrastructure going back and forth. Or a lot of times when communities don't really adopt those smart planning principles, smart growth principles, infrastructure costs. It's just that building it is one piece of it, but then maintaining it. We want to make sure that we are maximizing our sewer, water, our roads, and using them to the best extent as possible. So it's, again, all works as part of one system. And public health, I think, is more and more, I think we're in the early stages of really doing a better job of thinking about all the things that the city is doing from a health perspective. And that's, I'd love to see that as council did when it was creating its goals. Its safety and health are kind of go hand in hand. And so we need to be partners in that process and be thinking along those lines. Rita or Melanie, anything to add with that? Nope. Okay. All right. Let's see. I've got maybe time for one more question. And this is a good way to end. The prioritization seems hard when you hear from so many inputs. How do you do it? I'll turn that over to council.
I'll start that one, Rita. So yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, we are still figuring that out. Like we're newly elected. We came in, a lot of the values that we spoke about on the campaign trail clearly resonated with enough voters to get us into these seats. So, that's sort of how I approach it, is like, here's kind of my values and here's what our shared values are for the vision for the city. And then you have to just sort of start getting down to how do you prioritize and what are the actual resources available to the city that can actually be put toward these problems. And it's just sort of a question of what do you think is important for the best to do the most good for the most people in the city. And for me, a really big focus on planning for the future. I think that's a huge role for the council. And so when you're thinking about prioritizing, projects, goal areas, whatever it is, you always have to think about, the future and where and how this is going to affect how we grow and how we change in the future. So, I mean, it's tough. I mean, on the micro level right now, it's just trying to figure out who to put on the transportation bond committee. And when we have so many great applicants, it's just going to be hard, right? So, and I think that's why it's great that we are a group of 7. We don't have to do it alone, and we can have kind of a group discussion and help each other figure these things out, because they are tough questions.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, oh, go ahead, Rita, sorry.
Oh, to echo everything that Melanie said, it is really hard. And I think that it was really helpful to kind of have the campaign to have a lot more one-on-one conversations with community members here, and then also having that kind of follow us into being elected and sworn in. I think a lot of how I navigate it is very similar to what Melanie said. When we see kind of the environment, like what's happening in Bend right now, when we see kind of the needs that feel most pertinent or going to support people to live through the season, is kind of where my energy gets focused, and knowing that there will be another season, and that will kind of shift my focus. And as we kind of continue to progress as a city, also like our focuses will continue to progress and support the community depending on kind of what the environment is. And difficult to even do it from that scope also. And so just continuing to try, and also being really grateful for city staff and having 6 other city councilors to ask questions about. Maybe they already talked to that person, and so they have information about that specific subject. And so we're really able to try and balance that as 7 humans with all of our amazing support.
Thank you. And I know there was a couple of questions that we didn't get to. We'll do our best to respond, follow up and respond in writing to those. And I might turn it back over to the chamber with any, well, I guess there's one more slide just to remind folks to stay connected. We love these opportunities to engage, but let's make sure that they don't end here. I think there's one more slide, Michaela, if we could switch to that. All right, and we have, just as most organizations, our tentacles in lots of different social media channels that you can see there. Please do sign up and get information directly from the city, and be an ambassador and be a part of this community. And hopefully it goes beyond just receiving information, but helping us shape Bend and being part of our neighborhoods or boards or committees, or helping us shape some challenging topics in front of us. There's a lot to tackle, and that's the great thing about Bend, is that I think there's just amazing amount of human capital to help us address those problems. So I think that is it. Again, unless the chamber has any parting words.
I just want to say thank you so much for all of your input and for giving us a great overview of how things work and where you guys are in the process of setting these goals for the next couple years. I just want to remind everyone watching that, you know, these guys are working really hard for us, and we have our own small worlds, you know, our little neighborhood and our little pocket and our issues that we're working on. And, you know, just to complain doesn't do much. So I think it's so important to find a way to get involved, find a way to help the problems that are bothering you, or things that you are afraid of, things like that. Just like Councilor Schenkelberg said, to, you know, get involved. And there's plenty of ways to bring if you've got that fire in your belly, as she said, to just get involved. So that's our main call today, especially to the young professionals in town. I think hearing your voice is going to be really important. I think there are so many great resources today in order to do that. So thank you so much for sharing all of those. Eric and Melanie and Rita are counselors. And I just want to say I will be sending this recording out so you guys can watch it again and get all of that good information. And we'll send links as well of where you can access, where you can get involved. So thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Thanks again.
Be careful in the snow, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yes.
everyone. Drive
Bye.
safe.